so much for coming. Thanks. Thank you so much for coming, especially on this beautiful night when there's probably a heck of a lot better things to do. But I shouldn't say that, should I? But whatever. Again, thank you for coming. Just to let you know what's going on, going forward in May. We haven't solidified the date yet, but some of you know Officer Detective Frisch, who just retired, Jeffrey Frisch, and he is quite a storyteller, and if they're not true, he just makes them up. But he is a very good storyteller, and he's going to be here. He just retired, he's golfing every day, so we had to give him some time. But it looks like it'll be a Thursday night because he's in a Wednesday night golf league. So Thursday night, May 26th, which is coming up more on Memorial Day weekend. So once again, if you are a member, that's a free program, of course. Most of our programs are free to members. And if you're not a member yet, you should be making out this form. Some of you are on our email list. We're up to 87 members, which is pretty good for us, but I think I want 100. I think that should be the goal. So if some of you may not even be members yet, if you paid $5 at the door, coming to 2 programs is just about the equivalent of joining us anyway. So it would be better, really, if you joined us and all the programs are free, except an occasional special thing like a Christmas party or something like that. So anyway, that's that. So if you haven't made out one of those, please do. This is not a very long program tonight. I gave this about 15 years ago. We had to do some research on it. I gave it at the Strand Theater. I'm not even sure why I did that. But maybe it was for an anniversary of the hurricane of '38 or whatever. I'm not sure. But bear with me because I have had a busy day today and I haven't practiced my thing too much. Today, just to let you know, today I had the honor of playing Steve Harvey at the Wild Women's program at the Senior Center. And so we played Family Feud, and I was supposed to be, I guess, the Steve Harvey guy, asking the questions and top 5 answers and all this stuff, and it was interesting. They don't call them Wild Women for nothing. All right, so 1938, most of you were not around, I am sure. Probably all of you weren't around. And I was hoping to share some stories with you tonight. I have a few, but I was hoping that other people might be able to share some from their parents or grandparents or whatever. I feel like a weather reporter or whatever. But remember back in those days, nowadays we know when a hurricane is coming before it's even a hurricane. It's not even born yet, not even formed yet, and we know that it's coming. This is a little different, obviously. We had no idea. It, of course, formed down in like the West Indies and came up to Cape Hatteras and Philly and all the way through, and nobody quite knew what path it was going to take. If you see the old newspapers, I think the big thing about the hurricane in Clinton was that it probably was the actual hurricane that was already starting to happen. But I have 2 days of newspaper accounts in the far room, in the front window. And that's before the hurricane ever hit. And Clinton had, I think, 4 inches of rain, for those 2 days. Leominster, I think, had to close bridges because they were unsafe. The Nashua River on Green Street, which is our lowest point in town, was already starting to overflow. This was before the hurricane ever hit. So all of these pictures you're about to see are the ones out there. It wasn't like just that one day, September 22nd or whatever. All this crazy stuff was happening down south, and then it followed, of course, all the way up. And for the first 2 days, even before we knew something was going to hit, we were in serious trouble here. There's even a newspaper account of Mechanic Street. Remember, that's where the police station was, on the lower level, now the basement of the Icon Museum. And I've seen a few good-sized puddles there in my day, but Mechanic Street just totally flooded. and came into the police station. I mean, flooded the police station. And the item article mentions the fact that they used old Clinton Daily items to block the water. So some would say that's the best use of the
Can hear.
That is not true. So anyway, we got hit. And this is September 22nd, the start of it. The first day, September 21, the item's weather report, the little thing in the corner, had rain tonight, clear tomorrow. But it really didn't end up that way. The wind started to blow from the south. By 4 p.m., the velocity of the wind was 60 miles an hour. The wind continued to increase, and some gusts were 115 miles per hour by about 5:30 that afternoon.
Is that local?
That's local, yes. And so this was the headline from the day after. Clinton suffers worst cyclone, they called it, in history. So here's some of the sort of the minor headlines. This is all one headline, but it just tells you what was going on. Roofs blown off, walls fell, school buildings rendered unsafe, 800 chimneys blown down, thousands of trees uprooted, streets impassable, the town in shambles, martial law declared. This is the September 22nd, the headlines in the Clinton Daily item. So the WPA board got together in all New England governors. They met in Boston, and WPA was, of course, going strong then, all right? And some projects in town, and maybe not happening at exactly the same time, but WPA, of course, built the wall on Nitro there, whatever, on Mechanic Street. They built a wall on Fuller Field. Another thing they did, I just found out recently, is they put the fence up on Crown Street. You know the acre, Crown Street. That's a little hairy. Without a fence there, you'd be headed down into the woods and into the Nashua River. They put that fence up as well. Our old post office, I'm not sure if it was like a WPA funds did it. It wasn't like local workers who built it, I don't believe. But that was another project going on at the same time. So right away, we had sort of like free help. All right, we needed help so badly. You couldn't pass on the roads. Some people couldn't get home. Wires down. So they put this in the item right away. That if you're working on a WPA project, we need you here at the town hall, 7 o'clock in the morning on Friday, and that included whatever projects you were working on at Fort Devens or in Winchton, whatever. You had to be here because we needed help big time. So the WPA men's, it says swing axes, remove trees. This is Friday evening, September 13. There were a lot of people. There were 300 workers in town on various projects, and all of them were put to work to try to clean up the town. So it wasn't just and of course many private citizens stepped up too, of course. And even, of course, the Boy Scouts. So they, was all the locals were digging us out on this disaster. Private citizens, volunteer groups, and of course local Boy Scouts helped out. They would have to get into their uniforms. That's what kind of made it official. They worked in their uniforms, and they opened up several major roads in the north end section of town. And then later on, an item editorial stated this. I thought it was kind of interesting. It is hoped that when the time comes for the Scouts to replenish their treasuries, their heroic work will not be forgotten, for they certainly are contributing. Our hats are off to them, and we hope many citizens who have been assisted by their grand work will personally express their thanks to them. So the Scouts did us a great favor, worked very hard. So, as I was saying before, the previous 4 days, before the hurricane ever hit, before we ever knew we had a hurricane coming, we had, I thought it was 4.5, it's 6.5 inches of rain fell on this area. 6.5 inches. And so the lowest point in Clinton is Green Street. This is it. And it was already, of course, starting to flood. And Here's another look at Green Street. This is the walking bridge. I'm going to tell you a couple of quick stories. My dad grew up on Green Street, and it was kind of a weird thing growing up because I lived on the acre, but it was the last house before Green Street, right off Barrett Street, Oak Hill Avenue. So we were the last house before the cornfield, and the cornfield is right across the river from Green Street. So we kind of, you know, he in his day played football and baseball and all that on the cornfield, and I did in my day. And in fact, he claims he and his buddies built an underground shack where later my house was built, our family home was built. And so he would play and jump in the National River and go crazy and all those good times that we did too years later. So my dad claims that he was the last guy across the footbridge. And I still don't know if that's necessarily true. My father can spin a pretty good story. But on Barrett Hill, if you know the acre, Barrett Street goes down and now it's a dead end. And in those days, there was a walking bridge that was there. And so you could go right across to Green Street, and that's how Green Street kids went over to the cornfield and all that kind of stuff. And but anyway, certainly the hurricane and the rain before that took that bridge right out. And the abutments are still there. But my dad used to tell the story that he and his buddies were playing in the cornfield. Even the cornfield was starting to flood. And it figures he didn't know enough to come in out of the rain, probably. And the wind was picking up, and the trees were bending, and pretty soon my grandmother was screaming out the back window from Green Street, where so many immigrant families lived, you know, Germans, Polish, Irish, Italians, and, you know, the kids sloshed across this bridge, and then, according to my dad, he heard this, you know, huge creaking and all this stuff, and he turned around. He was the last guy across. I think he was 10 or 12, 13, and there it went slowly down the river. And it's funny because the bridge abutments are still there. If you take a good look, you go down Green Street past the old Colonial Press, and the houses are all on the right, and then all of a sudden they stop, and the river's right there. Right after that last house, if you take a good look, you'll see these big concrete supports that supported that walking bridge. They're still there. Nobody bothered to clean them up, I guess. And then another part of that story was there was a huge tree across from my grandparents' apartment, and I think it was 217 Green Street. And the winds were so strange acting, swirling around and going in different ways, that the tree would have fallen like right across the road. It was huge and right onto the house. And so my dad said he ran home that day, soaking wet and everything else, and the bridge went down. And he finds his mother sitting at the table with her rosary beads, of course, and praying that tree wouldn't come down, but it was shaking, whatever. And anyway, it ended up falling, crashing, and falling up the cliff that's across the street, which again shows you the way the winds were. So strange that the tree was already leaning way over here, and for some reason it fell that way. So be thankful for little... There's probably part of the abutment right there. That's the part of the walking bridge, and that's Green Street in the background. And then, of course, here's Vale Street. You know Vale Street, the playground. It's not a lake or the ocean. This is what it looked like. There was serious roof damage at Colonial Press and Blake's down on Green Street. The Hoffman plant was completely flooded. And most major streets in Germantown were impassable due to fallen trees. Most people living along the river, Green Street and Spruce Street and in that area, took refuge in the Clinton Armory at the top of Chestnut Hill. And they put in cots, and they had a lot of food set up, and that was like the shelter area. So this is interesting from, in 1936, there was a section of town, Elm Street, which again is very, very low, down near Vale Street, off of Water. And the Wassell family, that's 38 Elm, that's Mrs. Elizabeth Wassell and her sons, Charles and George, and daughter Helen. And then they had neighbors, the Farrows, That was John and his wife Ethel and their son John, and all of them already owned rowboats because of the 1936 flood. So they just got into their rowboats and just got the heck off of Elm Street and went to safety that way. I mean, can you imagine? You have to take a rowboat up. We see that on the news, but you wouldn't think it happened in Clinton, but it did. This is probably the most severe damage of all. This is the Corning School. It used to be called the Pleasant Street School, but I went there a few years back anyway. And you can see what happened. And just the entire facade of the building got absolutely wiped out. That's the two front doors there and are enter into like a hallway or foyer. And there was also an upstairs one, which is totally exposed in that picture. And those two doors up top would lead into two classrooms. There were two classrooms on the top floor and two on the bottom floor. I had Teresa Noon in 6th grade. Oh, it would have been 1963 because I remember Kennedy's assassination from that grade. So the schools, of course, were wiped out. Here's, of course, the superintendent had to say no sessions of any school until Monday, so the kids had 3 or 4 days off anyway, and no sessions of Corning School until further notice. So those kids must have cheered big time because they had no school at all for a little while. And then later on, we had this announcement that, you know, if you did go to Corning School, you're going to report to Dietzman School. Dietzman is later part of Clinton High School. The old Clinton High School, right where the police station is today. That was Dietzman, so those kids had to report there. So they probably weren't happy after that. But and these are like some general shots. We lost 2,200 town-owned trees, 2,200. And 100 of them were in Woodlawn Cemetery only. Imagine that. The tree damage caused, of course, serious damage at the cemetery to gravestones and markers, and of course several thousand privately owned trees were lost as well, along with hundreds of pine trees along the north and south dike that people didn't even discover were damaged or lost until much, much later when things calmed down and people would be out walking or whatever, and then they'd see the damage. This is more of the same. But the real damage, I think what really took the heart and soul out of more trees, the heart and soul out of the town of Clinton was this, Central Park. Nowhere was the tree damage more evident than in Central Park. And of course the Foster Fountain was given to our town in 1895, and a giant elm had wiped that out. And we have some of those pieces. You probably, when you notice, came in. We have two of the ladies, what do we call them?
Maidens.
Maidens, okay, whatever. The maidens are at our front door. They are from the original, that fountain right there. We also have a cherub around the front. I think that could be her underneath the first, whatever. But, so we managed to save, we didn't. They ended up at Conti's Florist Center up in Prescott Street, and somehow or other we ended up with them maybe 20 years ago. So that's why we left them there. And of course we have a new fountain modeled exactly after that, and I believe built by the same company that built it in 1895. How about that? It looks a little more cleaned up. You see the Unitarian Church in the background, Phil Duffy's house there on the right. And this is, again, this is all Central Park. The item had this like editorial that said one of the saddest sights of all was the town's beauty spot, Central Park, which, when the darkness descended last night, was a picture of complete destruction and desolation, and presented a scene so pitiful to look upon that many loyal citizens were moved to tears. Another victim of the park was a beautiful Christmas spruce tree that had been planted by Edward Breed and decorated each year by the Clinton Women's Club. And again, this is more just some sample shots of Central Park. And look at the size of the trees. Unbelievable, the power of nature. Look at that. I can't even tell you what view that is. I see the fence around there. You can recognize that, but I don't know which side we're looking at. There's another one too. Of course, Clinton High was where the police station is today, and that had some damage, not as much, but look at the trees again. So obviously many vehicles were wiped out during the storm, and this is probably the most famous incident. It occurred on School Street, opposite Wovencraft plant, which is, School Street. Nipro's on one side, Nipro's really on both sides now, J-Bell, but this is on the other side of where Wovencraft was. The left side, the car was on the right side going up the hill. And anyway, the guy had just bought it, It was a green car. It was owned by a guy named Nathan Trepner, and it was lying like a crushed eggshell, buried into a pile of bricks, which had blown off from the other side of the road and blown off and hit the car. And needless to say, he hadn't even owned the car for 24 hours. Brand new. Here's Chestnut Street, again in total ruin. Trees blocking the road, Water, Prospect, Church, Union, all completely blocked. Many car owners were forced to leave their cars parked on High Street and try to walk home. Again, you can't get by, you can't get in, and with the wires down, it'd be crazy to go out and walk it. Anyway, the town hall became the command center for many of the cleanup activities. Right next door, the Unitarian Church suffered roof and facade damage when a huge elm fell against that. You can see it right there. Heavy trucks with block and tackle were used to haul the tree from its position, and Jake Bowman was in charge of the operation. He was the custodian of the Unitarian Church for years and years and years. The Unitarians weren't the only ones to suffer. There's another picture of the Unitarian Church. The Episcopal Church was damaged when a large tree fell on it from the Mechanic Street side. This is the one, the Icon Museum would be just to the left, because we're in the back of the church now. The roof of St. John's Church was blown in partially during the storm. The rectory and the convent suffered damage also. And without a doubt, though, the worst damage was at Buck Chair. Buck Chair was on Flag Street at the time, and made quality chairs and tables. Most of you probably know Buck Chair as down here, almost opposite Union Street, right there. But it first was located on Flag Street, and the roof collapsed, and people were injured, and one person, we had one casualty from Clinton during the hurricane of '38, Andrew Horn. These were the people who all worked at Buck Chair, and Andrew Horn lived at 962 Main Street. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors Monahan and Lentino tried desperately to save his life. One of his legs had to be amputated, and he died on the table under emergency battery lights. And he was Clinton's only casualty. And the funeral was Saturday, September 24, only a few days later at St. John's Church. And you might recognize some of the names of the people who were his bearers: Otto Brandley, Frank Borspohl, George Krause, Emil Bissonette, Fred Levinger, and Foster Kinnear. Remember, there used to be a Kinnear Insurance. And less than a month later, Buck Chair was forced to move to its new location on Main Street, where most of us know it today, opposite Union. This is how do you pronounce that, Bob?
Tarullo.
Tarullo. This is Bob's old neighborhood. This is the Tarullo building on Grove Street, right opposite Ledge Court. And you can imagine the wind whipping across the Nashua River near the dam and kind of coming up Grove Street. And it took the roof right off the building. Yep.
Took it off.
I'm coming with it, but go ahead. It took it off, and it landed, parts of it landed on Lane Avenue. So I don't know if you know where Lane Avenue is, but it's up where, like the Clinton Motor Inn used to be. That's Lane Avenue, right off to the left. So it took this and went right up over Rattlesnake Ledge, the big ledge that's overlooking the water, up and over the hill and really down to the bottom of sure, where? The bottom of Lane Avenue, I'm sorry, right there. So, unbelievable. And you think again of the power of Mother Nature. Roofing materials were blown all over the place, and again, it went right over the cliff, which is pretty high over there anyway. High Street was badly damaged. The Johnson Building, this is the Johnson Building on the corner of Union and High. And so we'd be almost like around the wall near Night Row, looking across. The building on the right is only famous because it was the Falcon Club. That's gone, and now that's municipal parking. Right there, that building to the right. And it's funny, that little doorway is still there, right beside the dry cleaners. There's a little tiny doorway, which I think goes into a cellar of that building. That's still sitting there, but the building on the right is long gone, and it's either it's cracking for the apartments. But you can see that the roof line, totally wiped out. And hundreds of bricks thrown everywhere. The metal part on the Brimhall block was lost. That's the corner of High and Church. Landed on the sidewalk opposite the Globe Theater, which is roughly where the Simple Man is behind me today. Newspaper accounts added that the flying metal sheets could easily have decapitated people. Several stores lost windows, Weber and Rose, Altman's, Philbin's, and others. They totally lost windows totally blown in. Members of Company G Guardsmen patrolled High Street in case of looting, but there were absolutely no cases reported of looting in Clinton. I can just imagine what it would be like, maybe not in Clinton today, but elsewhere when this stuff happens. That's what people do, it seems. Here's Prescott Street, completely blocked by fallen trees. Here's Water Street. It's pretty close to the corner. I think it's an old Harris house near Chestnut, almost opposite Chestnut from Philbin Como Funeral Home, which we mention right now, because here's that. The home of David I. Walsh, which is today the Philbin Como Funeral Home, was damaged. And they actually, I believe, yes, the caption I left in there, that Edward Breed was going to try to save that tree. I don't believe he was able to, because I don't think there's one there now anyway. But he was trying to save that tree. But as usual in Clinton, we have to turn it into kind of a political thing. So I'll read you this part. One item reporter found a bit of humor in hurricane politics. He said hurricanes are apparently are not political, as some of Clinton's finest families are discovering. First, the storm wrecked the cars owned by Democratic Congressman Joe Casey and his rival for the Republican nomination, town solicitor William Constantino. The same tree which smashed the congressman's car on Church Street went through Attorney Constantino's car, which was parked nearby. Severe damage was also done to the Constantino home, which put the hurricane one up on the Republican side. But if not only sent this large elm tree crashing into the Walsh home, but then Attorney George Casey, the Democratic congressman's nephew, suffered a deep cut on his left knee and requiring, many stitches. So anyway, so somebody decided it was, let's look at the damage done to the Republicans and the damage done to the Democrats. Whatever. So we had some great volunteers. Remember, the town turned out, like Clinton always turns out. For when things are down and out and things are rough, this town has always turned out. And we did too. Again, you saw Boy Scouts, WPA, just regular citizens doing what they could. But very much like our firefighters, remember our firemen went down to Louisiana, I think, to help with Katrina. These guys came from Illinois, and they were 3 Bell telephone crews and trucks arrived in Clinton at 8 a.m. to start restoring service to our citizens. Their first stop was the Hotel Clinton for breakfast. That's now the apartment building right beside the Old Timers, just down the road. And so then what they do is every day, literally, because they were almost somewhat like military, at least their training and practice, so they would literally run down Church Street at 6:45 a.m. and jump in their trucks, which were located in a large garage on School Street. That's where the St. John's parking lot is today. There was a lot of work to do. Over 1,500 telephones were out of service, and because most of the street lights were out, residents with power were asked to leave their porch lights on, and downtown businesses with power were asked to help keep the street illuminated. So 20 electricians from Detroit came to Central Mass to help restore service also, and all service was restored to Clinton and Lancaster by October 17, which is just about a month later. That's how long it took to restore services here. So there's a little bit about helping hands came from everywhere, and I just want to read you a couple of stories. I told you it was going to be a quick night. I want to read you a couple of stories about people who kind of stepped up, and if you have any stories, I'd love to hear them. But these are stories that came out of the local newspapers. I don't have pictures of them per se or whatever, but Miss Irene Crosman of 22 Pearl Street had quite an adventure. She was in Boston shopping when the winds picked up and trains and taxis were filling up rapidly. She finally realized that the train for Clinton was leaving North Station on track 13. That was her first mistake. And just made it on there on time. There were many stops along the way due to fallen trees, down lines, and other problems. She watched the wind actually blow the roof off of a building while on the train. The train reached Carterville, which I imagine is, the end of Berlin Street, Carter's Crossing, whatever, but had to stop due to wires on the track. The train then had to back up and connect to an old side track. By now, there were only 4 passengers on the train and the crew, and they were all stuck there. Couldn't really go forward, couldn't go back. So this woman, again, Irene Crosman, 22 Pearl Street, had happened to buy a frosted cake in Boston and decided to divvy it up among the stranded passengers and the crew. So nobody had a knife, so she cut the cake using a nail file, and everyone enjoyed every single bit of it. And they finally arrived at the Clinton Depot, where one crew member actually walked her through down wires and trees to High Street, and from there 2 teenage girls helped her to reach Pearl Street. So once again, people just stepping up and doing the right thing. And the last story I have for you is, for whatever the reason, the Strand Theater never lost power, all right? So, which was a godsend for many, many people living in the area. So it ended up being like a safe haven for many people who didn't have power. The Strand never closed, and so they would just start showing films that they had to entertain those who couldn't get home. And a woman from Lancaster who would stay there would occasionally get on the piano and lead sing-alongs during the time. And the Strand staff, you ready for this, served milk and cake to everybody until they could all go home. So anyway, anybody have any stories on that, or you know of any? I know Elaine Patterson told me her mother was carrying her, was pregnant with her, and got blown down the street where she fell, and there was some serious health concerns about her, but everything obviously turned out well, except Elaine isn't with us tonight, but she'll be back Saturday. But anyway, so that was her story for the hurricane of '38. Anyone else? You're all too young, I guess.
My mom lived in London, Connecticut. She was 4, and she just remembers this huge lattice of rose bushes being torn away from the house, and
Yeah.
everything just looked like a bomb pit. That she
I can imagine. I mean, that's a good way to put it. I mean, everything must have just looked like just absolutely war or something. I mean, trees down, stuck, and you think about, you know, and I don't want to carry on about it, but I mean, Clinton has always been that way. I used to say, you know, when you're down and out, this is the place to be, because people just find a way to help you. And we have a lot of, it's true, we have a lot of agencies in town that do that now anyway. So it's not necessarily up to individual, but, you know, anyone can go down a week. Any one of you can go down a week, any day of the week and have a meal. No one's checking to see how much money you have or how much money you make and all that kind of stuff. You just go, you know, and there's many sources like that in this town. And then again, private citizens, when there's a fire, when you know, someone passes away, a neighbor. It's just one of these towns. I don't know if every town does that, but Clinton always has, and it certainly did it during this huge, destructive hurricane. Hopefully there'll never be another one like it. But,
Jerry.
Yes.
The Wassos on Elm Street, and I don't know if they're still there, but they were pretty hardy because remember the double flood we had? Was it 2010 or 2011?
Oh, yeah.
Main Street and Green Street and Elm Street.
Yep.
They were still there then,
That's right.
Oh, that's right.
and they got
yes.
flooded. And the
There
next
is a
generation.
Wassel family
Yeah.
that lives on Elm, I know. I don't know if it's the same people.
I remember we had everybody and their brother came to town. Deval Patrick was the governor. He came out, the National Guard, John Kerry, and they were going around to the various parts of the town. But the Wassels were still there
The
then.
diamond and the playground was like underwater, just like that picture. It looked like a lake. And canoes, yeah, that's right. Yep, wow. Yes,
Terry, I noticed on the thing it said martial law was declared. Was that local or state?
I bet you that was probably state, but it was the National Guard here checking for looters going up and down the street because the windows busted. They must have had police out, of course, left and right. And I don't know if WPA would have been some kind of enforcement, I doubt it, but they're the ones that swung the axes and opened the roads and hauled off the trees and stuff like that. But again, a lot of these things, the damage, you don't know until you start to go out and around, you know. And I know at the reservoir, it takes a long time, but I'm sure it took possibly 5-10 years even for people to walk certain sections of the reservoir. All of a sudden see this whole section of trees all gone, and that's only then do you realize, oh, that must have happened during these times or whatever. I think there was a tornado that hit around the reservoir in like a mini twister in maybe, I was going to say 2010 or something, roughly. And it was the same thing. Nobody really knew much of the damage until you go out there and look at it, and then you realize, you know, wow, talk about powerful. So, any questions? Well, again, thank you for coming. We got plenty of food. There's some great exhibit. Please take a look at that front window in the director's room of the 2 days before this thing even hit. And you're going to see that we were in deep trouble even before a hurricane, like big trouble. So we have, Nikki Zanglis isn't here. She's a classmate of mine, but she told me her parents were married during the hurricane. And they had to do a candlelight service. You know, that sounds great, but it wasn't meant that way. It had to be a candlelight service. And, you know, all these guests came and, you know, they were all busy trying to save their own lives. But anyway, that's also in the newspaper. So thanks again. Be looking for May 26th. Detective Frisch, who will keep you very entertained, I promise. Thank you.